everybody, in this video, we're going to be looking at Draw SVG. And as you probably have seen the demos, it allows us to draw our SVGs, right? So it's pretty simple. There's not many settings here. We can either go from or to. To is essentially the opposite. So it kind of starts drawn, and then you can go to a particular value. Now you can define your origins here. And let's say if we set this to be 50, okay, by 50, okay, what that allows us to, let's go to the from, let's do 50, 0, okay. What that does is that allows us to kind of have a starting point. So it's the origin of where things start the animation. You can also do percentages. So if you do 50%, it kind of like starts at half, essentially, okay. So if you don't want to animate the whole way, start from something maybe a little bit more abstract, you can definitely do that. Okay. Now there is this live update origin on resize, so that if you're resizing your browser, I don't necessarily recommend turning this on if you don't have to. It can be resource intensive. Okay. So definitely use that checkbox sparingly. Okay. Because if users are going to be resizing their browser a lot, it could keep having to recalculate all those SVG positions, and that can be resource intensive. So turn that off if you don't necessarily need it. So now for the magic. How do we make all of this happen? How do I get an SVG that does this? Okay, so let's look at edit mode. And here we see that we have two ways of doing this. We have a selector type of class or an ID. And then you just take the selector here. So, but how do we do that? So if we look at, we have an SVG inside here, and we actually need to modify our SVG in order for all this magic to happen. So I'm going to take this SVG code and open it up in a code editor so we can have a better look at it. So here's the SVG that we were looking at. Obviously, this is a code editor. I currently use VS Code. It's free to download. Not to be confused with Visual Studio for Microsoft. This is VS Code. Okay. It's a great free editor for Microsoft. And I know we're using an editor for Microsoft. Crazy. I use it every day and it's awesome. Okay. So here we have 4 different shapes. We have a circle, an ellipse, a rectangle, and a polygon. You could also use paths. You can use all kinds of things. Okay. But essentially what draw does is it will take the stroke, okay, and then animate that stroke. Now, in order to target these, remember I was using the class of draw. So if you look here, all I did was add the class of draw to each of these elements. Now, if I wanted to animate them individually with different draw SVG stacks, I can then, have a different class in each one. That would allow me to target each one individually. You can also use staggers that we've seen staggers in other videos where you can then stagger the drawing of each one. Now, I showed you can also do a selector of ID. I think class is probably the most convenient because then it allows you to target multiple things. If you use an ID, you have to make sure that each ID is unique. You cannot have multiple of the same ID. So if I were to use, I could just change all of these to be, let's just go ID equals, and then here would be, I don't know, circle, circle. And then for ellipse, I could put, ellipse. And for rect, I could put an ID of rect. And polyline, I can put an ID of polyline. Okay. And oops, I just realized I overwrote my class equals draw on all of these. Oops, my bad. All right. So there we go. You can add an ID to each one. But the ID has to be unique, or you can add a class and then the class can be the same, and then you can animate them all at the same time and things of that nature. You can also just have each class be different as well. I recommend using classes just so you don't get in trouble with IDs. IDs can be, problematic if you have multiple of the same ID on a page. Some unexpected things can happen. So I definitely recommend using class if you can. So that's basically it. You can use your favorite, whatever SVG editor that you want. Again, SVGs are just XML code, okay? Or they kind of look like HTML. It's XML based. They're both XML based languages. And then you can just add class or IDs to each one. And then inside your SVG draw SVG stack, you just simply do class of draw. Or again, if you're using IDs, you would target that particular ID.